Well, good afternoon. So glad to have all of us here on today, and just a wonderful opportunity, and thank Jamie and Kinetics Live for this opportunity to share with you definitely a labor of love and definitely a lifetime of research. The book is entitled The Forgotten Prophet, Bishop Henry McNeal Turner and the African American Prophetic Tradition. And what I want to do to start off my talk, I just want to read page 1 and the top of page 2, because it sets up exactly where I want to go in this presentation. And then, of course, we'll be open for questions and discussion. On January the 1st, 1866, Henry McNeal Turner was the keynote speaker at the Emancipation Day celebration in Augusta, Georgia. Organizers billed the day as the first day of freedom and celebrated the ending of the Civil War and the passage of the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery. Many people, both black and white, in the audience that day sensed the excitement in the air and were ready to begin the arduous process of building the South through Reconstruction efforts. Turner sensed the mood as well and ended his speech with a charge to black folk in the audience. Let us love the whites and let bygones be bygones. Neither taunt nor insult them for past grievances. Respect them, honor them, work for them, but still let us be men. Let us show them we can be a people respectful, virtuous, honest, and industrious. And soon their prejudice will melt away, and with God as our Father, we will all be brothers. Hallelujah. However, almost 30 years later, Turner's tone changed. With the end of Reconstruction, the 1875 Civil Rights Bill declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, and the increase in lynching and the gains of Reconstruction disappearing, Turner was no longer optimistic about the future of the United States and the role of African Americans, or the role that African Americans would play. In a speech given to the Congress of Africa in Atlanta in 1895, Turner declared, "There is no manhood future in the United States for the Negro." Now, this book is an examination of the life and career of Bishop Henry McNeal Turner, a study that examines Turner's rhetorical trajectory from 1866 to 1895, a trajectory that moves him from "let bygones be bygones and we will all be brothers" to "there is no manhood future in the United States for the Negro." It is a story about 19th century America and how African Americans found voice and reclaimed agencies to speak up and speak out on issues germane to them and their communities. It is also an examination of race and the use of the African American prophetic tradition. It's a story on how Turner's rhetoric shifted over time, but stayed primarily rooted within this religious tradition. It is also a story of how someone will later become a proponent of African immigration as the panacea for African American woes in America, but yet still found relevance as an orator and leader in America. And that is the part of the introduction to the book. Excuse me, yeah. That's the part of the introduction that I begin to talk about Henry McNeal Turner throughout the introduction. But when I bring up Henry McNeal Turner, mostly when I bring up Henry McNeal Turner, most people have never heard of Henry McNeal Turner, even folk in the AME church. But when I talk about Turner, the second question is, how did you come to find out so much about this man? Henry McNeal Turner was a prolific writer, orator. He was the public intellectual of his day. And I just so happened, when I was a PhD student at the University of Memphis, And it was, I'll never forget, it was time to take our seminar class where we began to discuss what it is that we want to do for our dissertations. And I ran across Turner's on the eligibility of Negroes to hold seats in the Georgia legislative speech. I don't know how I ran across it. I don't know if it was on the internet or in a book or somewhere. And I just ran across, and it was a snippet. And that snippet was so powerful that I wanted to find out more about this Henry McNeal Turner guy. And come to find out, I did find out just a little bit more, enough to whet my appetite. Because I had already figured out that I wanted to do something in prophetic rhetoric or prophetic discourse. Now for some people, just a little bit about me, I finished my Master's of Divinity at Memphis Theological Seminary, and then I went off to the University of Memphis to do a PhD in communications, and with an emphasis on rhetorical studies. So, and then now I'm working as the Dr. James L. Nettles Professor of Rhetoric and Religion and African American Studies at Memphis Theological Seminary. And my research interest in a sentence is that I study how we articulate or construct the sacred or the divine in the public. So basically, I wanted to study prophetic discourse, but one of my advisors gave me a piece of advice that was real good. He said, you ought to attach, instead of just making a theoretical piece, attach it to a figure. Find someone in which your findings on prophetic rhetoric matches, or have that prophetic or that figure help you shape, you know, what it is that you're trying to do in prophetic discourse. And then that's when I ran across Turner. And I began to work on Turner. So one of the things that I found disheartening is that it was hardly any work on Turner, academically at all. None at all. It was one dissertation that focused on Turner rhetoric. It was about 4 more, 2 master's theses, 2 PhD dissertations that focused in some aspect on Turner, a couple of journal articles, but nothing in a way of just text. Because as a rhetoric guy, I need a text to analyze. So I'm thinking, okay, 19th century guy, probably spoke extemporaneously, didn't write down anything, so I'm about to give up, right? I'm gonna go find Martin Luther King. I know I can do something on King. We can all do something on King, right? But I said, let me just search again. And all of a sudden I start footnote chasing. Then all of a sudden I learned about a little old newspaper called the Christian Recorder. Yep. And here I found the copious amounts of work from Henry McNeal Turner, and then I started to place check. So wherever Turner went, I tried to find a newspaper there, and I found out that Turner wrote in that local newspaper too. So on and so forth. To my astonishment, that I found so many writings on Henry McNeal Turner that I had to decide which ones I wanted to study for my dissertation. So I started to focus in on his speeches as prophetic oratory. Because what I found so amazing, as I mentioned in the introduction, is how can someone go from let us become brothers, let bygones be bygones, to there's no manhood feature. Or if I took it to 1907, hell is an improvement as far as the Negro is concerned in America. So how does he move from being this optimistic, hopeful individual to a pessimistic one? That's my research question, right? So I began to start digging and began to start laying out this typology, if you will, on the African American prophetic tradition. And I began to find out that many people that we may argue or submit as prophets had this same type of trajectory. For Henry McNeal Turner, the optimism, of course, comes after the Civil War. 1866, January the 1st. Let bygones be bygones. This is a new day. Because before then, he was probably more of an apocalyptic prophet. The Civil War was the apocalyptic moment that a lot of African Americans believe that it was God eradicating and erasing and punishing America for the sin of slavery. And we had to go through that crucible, and out of that crucible becomes the new day. The New Jerusalem is the new America after, for African Americans at least, after the Civil War. And Turner was in that camp. Matter of fact, Turner, you know, we had time, I could talk about Turner being the first African American chaplain in the armed forces, helping promote African American men, of course, to join Union forces. Preaching from his pulpit in Washington, D.C., asking people to join in this right and righteous cause of liberation for our 4 million sisters and brothers that are in bondage and slavery. So after this, he's optimistic, and he's wanting to work, and he's wanting to be a part of the American fabric. So he adopts this kind of optimism, what I call the universal or optimistic prophetic persona, where the sacred is this whole notion that America is the new Jerusalem, or America is the stone cut from the mountain in Daniel, that America is the bastion of all the hopes and dreams of all people. Not only just African Americans, but all peoples coming to its shores. And some of the most patriotic rhetoric you want to read is some early Henry McNeal Turner. Turner is in that camp, and he is being prophetic, speaking out, but yet still drawing on the hope that America is the bastion of the liberty and that he hopes that America can be, and really believes, until 1868. That's when he and his fellow African American representatives in the Georgia State House was ceremoniously kicked out of the House because folk could not deal with their blackness. Not because they were black. Stop saying that. It's because folk couldn't deal with them being black. So he gets up on the floor and gives this 2-hour eloquent speech. You know, and he defends his right to hold the seat. Am I a man? I claim the rights of a man. And that's, a lot of people have read that speech or heard Turner, or heard about that speech. And this is a speech where he shifts from this universal prophet, which is the second one, to the representative prophet. He becomes now a representative prophet to the African Americans that are in that gallery and all around, that really supports his positions on African Americans can hold seats, and African Americans are genuinely human. No longer does he draw upon the American idea of sacredness, the civil religion that we like to lift up time and time. It's a civil religion, by the way, that Barack Obama did a masterful job, if you were really listening to his rhetoric in 2008. He had all black folk waving flags for the first time, like, woohoo, glad to be on that. And you're like, oh, okay. But the civil religion, right? And so he moves from that just a little, and he grounds himself back into God, the church, and about God's sense of justice as the represented prophet. So he's doing this. He's representing African Americans starting in 68, and then as Reconstruction goes through, Turner does some masterful work in building the AME church in the South. There is no AME church without Henry McNeal Turner. I think I can say that safely. Turner, especially in the state of Georgia, went around the state of Georgia, running from the KKK, running from folk, trying to place harm on his body, licensing and doing, so he's doing all of this stuff. And then, of course, he finally gives up his seat in the state house. He becomes a postmaster general. That didn't work out. Then he gets, becomes the elder of the AME church. And then he retires from that to go to Savannah, where he can start working and just on his writings and stuff like that. And then by 1877, you know what happens? Reconstruction is pretty much over. And then Turner begins to look at America differently. And then he becomes what I call this pragmatic prophet. And this is what we were talking about a little bit earlier, when the prophet now can not only just talk about visions, you got to have now a delivery system in order for us to get what you've been claiming that is rightfully ours. So for Turner, he didn't see it in America, it was Africa. Now, we know that the mass mobilization to Africa did not work because we're still here. But don't fool yourself. If there were boats and money, we could have easily been born on the shores of Africa. There was a lot of folk in the South ready to go now. Just anything but this roll of cotton here, right? So, but it was his answer, his prophetic answer to all of the problems and issues and concerns, because he, A, did not believe that integration would ever work because white America would never have it. And B, he did not believe that assimilation or this, let's just get along would ever work because it demeaned you as a human. That's right. So what is your option? Turner is one of the first ones to develop this third option, prophetically. Now, he is pragmatic in a way. He's trying to, he's working with anybody who had a ship or had money or had the wherewithal, and that meant he worked with some avowed racists, which a lot of people did not like at the time, meaning the American Colonization Society and others who were talking about back to Africa movements. Turner was on board. He was trying to say, hey, anybody who's going back to Africa, I'm with, because we need to get back there. And note this, he did not talk about himself going back, even though he visited the continent 4 times. He did not talk about himself going back. Even though he helped the churches there, and there is a whole piece that we could talk about Turner's relationships to African churches and the Ethiopianism that comes out of that, and all of that is just powerful. But Turner always looked at that as a mass movement, a prophetic mass movement. It wasn't going to take 1 or 100. And especially when he became bishop in 1880, could have gone any way he wanted to, especially when he became senior bishop in 1895. But he elected to stay in the South. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But he's talking about a prophetic movement. He's talking about a collective. He's talking about thousands. His number was 100,000 to go collectively. So that was his answer. The answer, of course, was rejected. But it was not like he did not have an answer. And the other answers were, let's keep petitioning, writing pamphlets, and so on and so forth, or which would be now, it's called the Booker T. Washington approach. Just, gradually, simply work hard, thrifty, leave all that other stuff alone, and everything's gonna be all right. But when that didn't work in 1893, when he gives that speech, when he gives his immigration speech, which, by the way, everybody applauded in the room on the day, but by the time the conference was over, everybody voted against him. He becomes, for the remaining part of his life, this pessimistic prophet. This prophet who did not see any hope in the way that we define hope, for African Americans to have a footing in America. So one of my next works, I stopped here at 1895 with this book, but the second volume to this would take Turner's life from 1895 to 15. to his death in 1915, because this is where we get some of the most powerful, insightful writings from Henry McNeal Turner. Writings that anticipate Malcolm X, definitely Marcus Garvey, definitely Elijah Muhammad, definitely Farrakhan, definitely some elements of hip-hop music, and yes, our very own James Cone. Because it's 1895 at the Baptist Convention that he begins to talk about God as a Negro. After, by the way, in 1892, 93, 94, he's already saying Adam and Eve were black. He's already doing that kind of theological work. Because he does not, at this time, he does not think that, he says the reason why we did not go back to Africa, his argument, is that Negroes did not go to, because Negroes beat up on themselves. They don't feel like they can do anything. So he's trying to do a theology that says that if you can see yourself in the sacred text, and if you can see yourself and that God loves you and God has given you the wherewithal to do the things that God has called you to do, maybe you will begin to see yourself in a different light. Turner is doing racial identity studies before divorce. Turner is writing, and it's pessimistic phase. And it's hopeful because prophetic rhetoric is hopeful. It's hopeful because Turner's audience has changed now. As a representative and pragmatic prophet, he had some, even some tensions moments, but he had the respect, if you will, and he kind of still did even at his death, but he had the respect of what was, thrown around earlier, the talented 10, the middle class. By the time he gets to as a pessimistic prophet, he is battling them, white folk, everybody, but guess who is in his camp? The sharecroppers, the poor, the people that are suffering each and every day. And that's why Turner doesn't leave and go to Africa or even moves to Philadelphia or move somewhere where it might be a little bit better. He wanted to stay with the people because a prophet stays where the prophet is called. The prophet is there representing the people, and that he knows that was the people. So when Benjamin Tanner and others were lambasting Southern blacks for being, wilding out and getting drunk and doing things that caused folk to lynch you, throwing it back on the victims. Turner was the one standing up. Why don't you come down here and live a week with me? See how much you think that then. Turner becomes this pessimistic prophet where he does not see any hope for change. He doesn't see African Americans going back there. He knew that's dead. He doesn't see any hope, any change, but yet he still speaks. He doesn't quit. Matter of fact, he dies in Canada, Ontario in 1915, May 8, 1915, on an AME trip. He's still working to his death. He's still trying to say something. But what the pessimistic prophet does is chronicle the voices and the cries of the people they claim to represent. So that's why we have on record what some sharecroppers and what the people that were afflicted by Jim Crow prison industrial complex early on, the chain gang. Yeah. We know what people were doing even in the military. Turner is the first one. He saw African Americans going to prison at record numbers. He's the first one to say, at least let them have some African American chaplains in there. Going back to his early days of being a chaplain. He would support efforts like Ida B. Wells and others who talked about lynching. Turner talked about lynching. When at a time, got to remember, this is late 19th, early 20th century. We're a generation behind slavery, over slavery. And people were honestly saying, slavery is yesteryear. That's past. We don't have to draw on any of that anymore. Let's just move forward with all this pessimism, Turner. And Turner would quietly remind folk, oh, somebody was lynched last night. We still can't ride, where we want to on the trolley cars, or we still, we Jim Crowed everywhere. And it started, of course, with the Plessy v. Ferguson decision. And what I do in my upcoming work is I take Turner from 1895, started with that Plessy decision, all the way to his Hell is an Improvement as far as the Negro is concerned. But it's out of that pessimism that Turner showed that he still loved and he still cared for the folk. Now, a lot of people always ask me, what is a prophet and how is a prophet, called and all of that. And I leave that up to the prophet and God. But who dictates you being a prophet is the audience in which you claim to represent. And there was no doubt that Turner claimed to represent the poor and the depressed and the folk when he becomes this pessimistic prophet. When he got up and kept on speaking, he gave the power to those people to get up and keep on speaking. And that's what I'm calling for today as I close this little part. That I'm calling for more pessimistic prophets. More pessimistic prophets. Because we are seeing, as we already chronicled earlier today, that even with an African American in the White House, even with an African American as Attorney General, even with African American leadership in our major cities, that the systemic issues and problems, which Turner does address, even in 1895 and 98, he's addressing the systemic problems. Even with all of that, we know that there are still people who are broken, who are poor, who are impoverished, who are in prison, who are left out. And for prophets to get up and to celebrate and to always congratulate without acknowledging that is a disservice to the prophetic tradition. The prophetic tradition also gets you in trouble. There's no safe prophecy. I talk about this in the book, that part of the prophetic is this Greek term parahesis, frankness or boldness of speech, typically and usually to the powers, and you know as soon as it comes out of your mouth that you could be in trouble. And I'm so sick and tired of people wanting to be prophetic and safe. There's no such thing. That's right. There's no such thing as top-down prophetic. That's right. It's always bottom-up. The middle class blacks in the civil rights movement were only responding to what the folk in the street were already doing. And they knew that they had to do it. Or some of them enlightened enough to begin to step out there and trust that God is calling them to do something new and different and radical. But it's always a bottom up. The prophetic is located where the people are that need to hear a voice from, yes, the Lord, but also a voice from a person that can represent and speak. We get into, the prophetic is not a theoretical dynamic either. So, can the subaltern speak? Yeah, but sometimes the prophet is the one speaking for. Because the prophet has the authority given by the divine, as well as the people to go out and to represent. The prophet is still needed. And once a prophet begins to see the world as it is and cast that vision to the world as it should be, the prophet is no longer surprised or disappointed or, hands up in the air and saying, oh, it's 2013, I thought this was over. Like some of us do. The prophet is quiet. The prophet is reflective. The prophet stands with the people. The prophet still holds hands and helps people get through so that people are not disappointed to the point of nihilism and to the point that they quit. What Turner did for his people, and I hope that prophets do even today, is still speak and still go out and be what God has called them to be. Thank you.
Any questions? Andre?
I would be interested in finding out how did Henry McNeal Turner develop this Afrocentric consciousness? 'Cause, I mean, we know later in his life he does. You know, is one of the first to go on record to say that God is black and God is Negro. How does this happen? What was his journey?
Well, you know, in the tradition, there's always been this kind of, even, you know, we take it all the way back to Africa, right?
Sure.
There's always this notion of the blackness of God and you know, and all of that. But what I argue that Turner does different is that he begins to look at that, and the best word I can come up with is this whole notion of identity studies. How he's the one that articulates this phrase. Oh, this question, wondering how does one see oneself in relation to God? And Turner says that if you cannot see God looking like you, and one of his writings, big lips, big nose, down the hair, but if you can't see that, then you are a walking monstrosity. Because there is no hope, because everything else is going to be, and we know that this is right, because he's doing Kenneth Clark studies before Kenneth and Mamie Clark is doing them in the Brown v. Board of Education. He says that if a child believes that he does not resemble God or the divine or anything that he thinks is good in life, if a child does not see any Negro in leadership, if a child does not see any of that, then that child will pass that inferiority complex to their children ad nauseam. So he starts, you know, like a good Christian bishop would, with God as the center of all of who you claim to be. You claim, I have to believe that God at least looks like me and loves me and cares about me and wants the best for me in order for me to operate within this mad, cruel world, because the world is telling me the totally opposite. So how do I, and he's trying to stop all nihilism. He's trying to stop all the people throwing up their hands and quitting. So he just begins to go deeper now. Where does his sources come from? He does not say. He just begins to write this stuff.
Sure.
He is this real organic intellectual. If Turner was alive today, he would be a blogger. That's how often he wrote in the newspapers, and he had these little columns. People begged for him to write because he was funny, he was a very good writer, and he just began to put these thoughts on paper. He's really worked, and remember, he does not have the benefit of the academy. That's one of the things that the Boyle kind of looked, you know, down on him about at his death, but still celebrating him as a self-made man that hammered his way up to the top, right? And Turner always wished that he could have had a formal education, but you know, I think he did well to teach himself Greek, Hebrew, and Latin, and all the writing that he did. I am in the process, by the way, I think you know this, Chris, of collecting all of the Turner writings. It's on Edwin Mellon's press. That was the only press that I found that would publish everything that I found on Turner. I have over 1,200 writings. We're working on volume 4. Now, the first 3 volumes are out from 1859 to 1880. You can get all of the Turner in their original form. I did not change anything. I wanted the original text, no footnotes, nothing, just the text, so people and hopefully scholars can begin to start digging through and seeing Turner like I'm seeing him as I go through his works as well. But yeah, Turner begins to start doing that, and it was just this whole notion of self-reflection and trying to figure out how can I get people to love themselves.
So in essence, he's doing contextual theology.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's exactly what I argue in the paper that I hope that Black Theology Journal takes up. You're absolutely right.
I think in a follow-up to the question, I think that we probably don't give people or contemporaries of Turner enough credit for an Afrocentric knowledge and sensibility.
Right. Sure.
Keep in mind, they deliberately named the church African Methodist Episcopal, and African Methodist Episcopal Zion, when others, and it's still going on today, there are people that are trying to get us to take African out of our name. And Turner and others saw the value of maintaining the connection to Africa.
Exactly.
And it wasn't just in name. It was values and ideals and ethics that he began, I think, to further uncover in its practical value for ministry. The follow-up question I have for you is, I like the way you break down this understanding of a forgotten prophet, the different ways we can understand it. I'm wondering if you could, you may have stated it already, but if you could restate how we can appropriate the pessimistic prophet in today's context.
Right. I think my understanding of what pessimism comes out of and I got it in the book here, but it comes, I discovered this, or uncovered this, I should say, by looking at all of this, you know, these prophetic denunciations that many of these African American writers and orators were giving, but yet in every strand I found this type of the audience rather, and they were. It was like they were being rejuvenated when someone really told the powers to be off, you know. So, for instance, you think about the Jeremiah Wright sermons that were YouTubed, right? And everybody in the congregation were like, amen, you know, and he was really, you know, and so I began to start looking at that and then start looking at Turner, and I was led to look again at the lament tradition in the Bible.
Yeah.
And this is what Turner is doing. He is publicly lamenting about the state of affairs. So the pessimistic tradition is grounded in the lament tradition of prophecy.
Would you categorize a Jeremiah Wright as a pessimistic prophet?
I would today. And I can trace Jeremiah Wright probably if I had some of his earlier writings. But you got to remember, Jeremiah Wright was in the military. He went, you know, served the country, served honorably. Begins this, he probably was this optimistic, hopeful prophet. And then he's, now what I've done, and I just hope some people, some other folk would begin to pick up the work, but in the book I tried to lay out the typology where you can get a figure and you can see if that rhetorical trajectory pans out. And I discovered it in Richard Allen. I discovered it in, of course, Turner. I discovered it in Du Bois. Du Bois, we kind of forget after the NAACP shake up, you want to call it, Du Bois become very pessimistic. So pessimistic. Right. He did go. King becomes pessimistic, especially after the Vietnam War speech. And then, if you want to do some contemporary stuff, I think Cornel West is in that kind of framework now. And I know we talked about Cornel West not critiquing the structures and stuff, but typically and usually the critique on a president, whether it was Obama, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Reagan, so on and so forth. And I did, because I was thinking about trying to do a paper on some of West's critiques, and when I was doing the research, some of the same stuff, you know, Clinton, some of the same stuff for, even, remember when Al Gore was running and, you know, we all blamed him for supporting Ralph Nader and getting Bush in. And so these type of critiques have always been a staple of him, but the critiques on the president has always been a critique on the administration and on the systems. What we need to ask ourselves is that can we operate in empire prophetically? That's the real question. So, because if I ask you, you know, well, should we never support another African American candidate for president? You'll probably tell me, no, I'm not saying that. But just know then that you are supporting an African American to be head of state and what all that means.
Yep. Good stuff. Good.